So now I invite you to sit down, and I also invite back Miss Orsetta Causa, and we will be joined by Miss Philippa Sigl-Glöckner from Dezernat Zukunft. Please take your seats. And I've heard that some of you might have had problems to see the screen, so we are moving the tables a bit as well. And maybe that will benefit you mostly after lunch. Please, so Philippa, Ms. Sigl-Glöckner, you have been listening to Professor Causa and also to Ms. Orsetta Causa. What are your reflections? If we start with the labor market theme and Ms. Causa's presentations, what were your reflections upon this?
Lots of work remaining to do. It's, you know, I mean, we actually do a lot of social policy, and we actually try and do a lot on the labor market, and in Germany, labor market policy has been quite active. But we're still not very good at targeting it at the people who need it the most. And I think that's what really, really stood out from your presentation, and how can we really reach them with targeted programs. I think, yeah, that's my main takeaway.
Yeah, and Professor Causa, your research, maybe it somehow touches the work of Ms. Causa. How would you comment on her presentation, or what stands out the most to you?
Well, at the end of my presentation, I have mentioned the unequal division of the burden of inflation between different social groups in Spain, probably due that the companies have been passing through the cost or the increase on intermediate cost to final prices, while wages have not been growing at the same pace. So this has provoked a loss of real wages, and as Orsetta has said, this has affected specifically to low-income households. And we have the debate that you have introduced in your presentation about if inflation, counter-inflation measure has to be focused on this kind of households. And it's true that in Spain, most measures have not been specifically focused to them, but even so, the research about their effects show that, considered globally, they have had a redistributed effect, because another thing that she has mentioned is that low-income households spend more part of their budgets in the items which prices has been rising more. So the measures that have managed to reduce their prices have benefited them. And another problem with the focused measures in Spain is that have not been very effective to reach poor people who need them because bureaucratic problems or something like that. While other measures more spread about the economy at the end have benefited them. Perhaps the only exception is the subsidy to the price of petrol and diesel, because in this case it's exactly the contrary. The high-income households consume more of these items.
Interesting. So, Ms. Causa, you are naturally at OECD. You look at all of the OECD countries, comparing them. Here in Sweden, I think we're fighting a bit with the image of Sweden, both with these international crises going on, but also in the field of economics and inequality. If we were to look to another OECD country for inspiration or as a guide to how we could handle a lot of these inequality issues or more efficient labor issues, which country would you say, and for which aspect would you say, for this aspect, look at what the Netherlands is doing. For this aspect, look at what New Zealand is doing.
I think that there is, I cannot answer to that question. Actually, there is no ideal model, and the ideal model is the model that depends on the context, on the challenges of the countries, and the country preferences as well. What I certainly would like to say is that on the southern part of Europe, where let's say I include France, in any case, the Nordic model is an image of, is a myth for us. You know, like we have been, you know, praising the flex security, and I don't know if you know the famous professor at Collège de France, Philippa. Actually, we will have Stephanie Stancheva, who was one of his students, and so he, every time that he speaks on stage, and he's very, very clever and very fun also, he always speaks about Denmark and Sweden and this model of security and flexibility. So maybe I want to be provocative and ask a question about the limit of that, or maybe we are too genuine, let's say, at least from my perspective, that I have this medium and maybe it's not working for some reason. What I do see for Sweden is a movement towards less progressivity in the fiscal system. This is something that I do see in the data. I also understand that there has been quite a few, not very recent, but for example, reforms of unemployment benefits, probably other things. Of course, there is the issue of taxing wealth, inheritance, which has been a debate also, I know, in Sweden. So I think that really there is no, I mean, if you ask me about labor market as an economist, I would think about the Nordic model. But maybe there is some limit to it. And then I think that, you know, countries have different experiences that we can sort of share, and but there is no ideal and model, yeah, it certainly depends about the challenge and the circumstances, but it's nice to learn from each other. For example, I don't know, I was working on housing, and there is an interesting model of social housing, for example, in Austria, that has been discussed, which is, of course, specific to Austria, but could be a source of inspiration. And then there are also, if you think about, for example, education, you can think about programs that have worked in terms of voucher programs, for example. There are examples of this in the United States quite some time ago, but that did work.
Voucher programs, can you please expand on
Voucher
that?
programs were basically programs where you give vouchers to families to get their kids in good schools or to move to areas in order to increase social mixity. So those were almost random assignments, and then you could follow the people over time in the data, and you can look at the way that actually social mixity works. And this was a natural experiment to show that. I think that this is a very important point. I'm not sure how much is important in Sweden, if more than in other countries, but for example in France, the problem of ghettos, of segregation, is something that is really hampering the social elevator. And there has been research also from myself a long time ago that really, with econometrics, I showed that mixity was good. So that is just a good example of desegregation, policies that desegregate work. And they don't work at the expense of the privileged, let's say. No, they work for everybody, and they work all the more for the non-privileged. So it's a win-win. I think that's a win-win. Like there is no, you know, the trade-off between incentives, no, when we think about taxation, for example. In the area of education, there is a lot of win-win, and I think there is a lot of things we can learn from each other.
Interesting. Could you expand a bit more about, you showed one of your slides here was about productivity. I know that there's a lot of people in the audience here who are highly engaged in productivity research, and we see that Sweden is actually falling behind, or is it that we have had in productivity compared to the other countries you were showing? Could you explain a little bit about that, or maybe what you see in your data that would actually explain why it's like this, and how we could actually move forward into a more productive economy, if you would say?
A couple of things. First, the point, this is OECD data, the OECD productivity compendium from colleague of mine, and there is a huge amount of work behind, and the data are quite an old vintage, because I wanted to show, not really, the point was not about productivity. My point was about that productivity stands higher than wages. And you would expect wages and productivity to move together. It doesn't, it's not the case. There is a decoupling. There has been a decoupling between wages and productivity. That's a long-term story. It's not a story of yesterday. It's probably not a story of this year. I don't know the data this year. Actually, this data looks simple, but they're not. And then there is also has been a decoupling within wages. There is this approach of within firm, for example, inequality that is super interesting, I think. So the point was not about productivity staggering. That's another issue, which is super important. As Solo was saying, the most important thing is productivity, okay? So how do we move to higher productivity growth in European countries? That's a big question. But I mean, if you look at my country, that almost negative productivity growth, Italy, I'm happy for the Sweden people. I mean, it's not so bad. But that's a problem, and that's a problem where we will speak with Stephanie about digital, about aspects of productivity aspects of growth that we can enhance with structural reforms, with education, with equality of opportunity, lots of reforms that we can do also to grasp to the benefits of digital, for example, and then of green. Bon, there is a discussion about the productivity side, but of digital for sure. And then, of course, Europe is stagnating, Sweden probably also, because of a lack of, I think, diffusion of technology. There is a problem of divergence between firms' productivity. So if you're interested into that topic, and go on the OECD website, we have people working on the firm aspect of productivity and the divergence in productivity across firms that you can then follow related also to workers. It's very interesting. You really look into the wage dispersion across firms, within firms. And that has a role to play in the aggregate, in compositional effect, in reallocation, effective reallocation to enhance productivity. And then, of course, there is the problem also of, the fundamentals. We have demography is obviously not helping us in that respect. But that's not, we don't have to we can do something about it. And I think that structural reforms, enhancing growth, productivity, equality of opportunities, and progressivity, that's something that can work. And we know what to do. The problem is to do it and to actually implement the policies that work.
Thank you for that. So, Ms. Sigl-Glöckner, well, I think if we move over to the anti-inflation action that we've seen very famously in Spain and not so famously here in Sweden, what was your reflections when you heard Professor Ukso's presentation?
Yeah, it was really a throwback to all the discussions last year on gas price cap. We had them very, very intensely in Germany and decided to do something slightly different. Meanwhile, you decided to cap the price for electricity generation. We all said, we can't do that because, gas is scarce, so we need to kind of leave the full price impact go into the system, where I thought, actually, it looks like Spain was smart on that. But then I was thinking the second step, so what we did in Germany was we capped 80% of gas usage from the last year. We capped the price for consumers, which was very, very hotly debated topic. And I mean, Isabella Weber speaking later, she was in the midst of it all. It was a big discussion, and in the end, I think it was a great policy, actually. Gas, I don't know how it is in Spain, but gas in Germany is a much bigger bill for consumers than electricity. We're heading into the winter. The public mood was pretty bad. Everybody was very, very scared. The government had to put a lot of money behind it, but in the end didn't use it. And I think it really calmed down the public mood, because everybody knew they would get by. And the very interesting thing on that policy was, and I would really be keen on your experience in Spain, was that, I mean, it was quite a technical discussion on capping prices, or, is it like more a one-off, like, check you send to people? to me, it sounded like the Berlin bubble discussion. And actually, like this time round, when you went to places that were far away from Berlin politics, where people just had to watch their income and didn't have the money, they all knew the policy. And they all really liked it. And they were like, oh, finally, like I can see this government doing something for me. So I thought in the end that was pretty successful and worked because, it reached people and it created security. But I mean, when I saw this and I was thinking, well, actually marginal price maybe twice is enough and capping it so you don't have it going into the whole system. You don't have to put fiscal policy behind it. It was also maybe quite smart. But I would be interested in how the population perceived it.
Yeah. Let me say that some difference between the German and Spanish experience about this, because first of all, for Spanish households, the problem was more in electricity prices than in gas prices. In Spain, we have also put a cap on the price of domestic gas for those households that have a regulated tariff. Not all households have this kind of tariff. And I think a big difference between the cap on gas price in Germany and the Spanish experience is that in our case, this is not paid by the public budget. It's not a fiscal payment of the difference of the difference between the real price and the capped price. In the Spanish case, the reduction in electricity price is funded by the reduction in windfall benefits from those electricity companies that are producing electricity without using gas. And without the gas capping, they were putting higher prices, even although the cost of producing electricity for them was not increasing. So it's not a fiscal subsidy, but a transfer of rents from for electricity companies to the rest of the company. Of course, this mechanism is in operation only to the end of this year, and I think that at the European level we have to discuss how to regulate the market. This has been an exceptional period with exceptional measures, but I think that we have learned that the regulation of the electricity market that we had doesn't work. It doesn't work. It has amplified the external shock in international prices, gas prices, to the prices of the rest of the economy, generating extraordinary profits from the electricity companies and extraordinary cost, not only to households but also to the rest of the productive system. And I think that this is the great debate for Euro next year.
I just want to say before I give you the word, so I would like in just a short while to open up for comments or questions, so please prepare. But first, Ms. Glöckner.
Sorry. And I just wanted to disagree a little bit. I think, so we had a very special situation last year with gas prices spiking like crazy. I actually wonder to what extent the very, very aggressive purchases of gas in international markets by the German government were a bit of a driver of the extreme spikes. But generally saying that the design of electricity markets in Europe is wrong because of that, I think is quite a big jump. So at the moment we have this marginal pricing that we've been discussing. So basically the price of electricity is always set by the most expensive technology coming in to satisfy the current demand. And I'm not sure I find it that simple to think about a better way to do this. One big problem was that, at least in Germany, the way that we subsidized renewable energy was we gave them a minimum price. So if the price fell below that, we would give them that so they would know that their investment makes sense. We just never thought about prices freaking out at the top end, so we didn't cap it. We should have done that. And that, I think, is a clear correction you can make. But changing this marginal pricing system, like in electricity markets, I think we need efficiency. It's quite a tricky one. And just a last comment, this whole thing is very topical in Germany. I don't know to what extent you have the debate here, because we're currently discussing capping the price of electricity for energy-intensive industry. And we're having a huge debate on it. And I have to say, I personally find it extremely difficult. Yeah. Because on the one hand, it's a potentially huge transfer to industry from everybody else in society. You will actually make electricity even more expensive for everybody else because they're using more. You want them to be efficient. On the other hand, you know, that's really good work in industry. We also, that's like sovereignty question. So I think this whole issue of how we permanently deal with prices in the electricity markets is really, really complicated. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So there's a few things to think about, even though if you might like the policy in itself and the consequences of it. So please, you don't have to sit on the edge to have a question. You can also be in the middle, and we will pass you the microphone. So is there anyone thinking about anything related to anti-inflation? I see a hand there in the middle, and I think if there's another hand, we'll take 2 questions. And you're sitting next to each other. Okay, so we'll have a strong representation. Oh, sorry, I couldn't see you. Okay, so we also have, let's gather up with 3 questions, so we'll have the 3rd one at the edge. Thank you.
Is it working? Yeah, thank you so much. So it's great. Whoa, okay. I just wanted to ask further questions about the mentions of the voucher system that was mentioned by Ms. Causa. Ms. Causa. Because in the United States, that's not considered typically progressive at all. And so I was just curious about the context of the comment, because in the United States, that's about private schools versus public schools. So it'd be a little bit more in the Swedish context, for example, of offering vouchers to people to access private health care in this country. So, for example, we know of families in the United States who have second homes, and they use the address to get, whoops, I've been kind of, they use the address to then get a voucher to go to a fancy private school. So I think it's, but the main point, and then I'll shut up, is that most people think that it undermines the public school system dramatically by sending the most ambitious and the most politically active families into the private system, which then undermines support for the public one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then also we have another participant on my right side.
Hi, Gabby Rebinder, Miljöpartiet, the Green Party, Sweden. And I was wondering, there is a new decision in the European Court of Justice, which just came in 2022, which basically takes away the possibility for people with guarantee pensions to move across borders. That affects mainly women, because of those are the ones who actually get more of a guarantee pensions, and disabled people. How important do you feel that free movement over the borders in Europe actually is? And if this sort of thing starts to fall, what do you feel about economic policies for the rest?
Is this question also directed to Ms. Causa, or was it directed to... Okay, so maybe I'll let you go first, both with the questions on the vouchers and this later question, and then I'll open up for you to comment as well.
Okay, sorry. On the vouchers, I was really referring to old research about the United States and various initiatives that have been taken, like natural experiments where it did work. My point was just to say that there are, I was in favor of policies that in a way or another, enhance mixity, equality of opportunities. If you think about this famous article by Raj Shetty et al. On where is the land of equal opportunities, that was more of my point about mobility being instrumental to social mobility, social elevation, and that the importance of the schooling system in that respect. So I was thinking about articles that I read years ago about some specific examples of the United States, but certainly not the current way in the politics that is implemented and people that are gaming with that, and the fact of gaming with policy initiative is unfortunately happening. Also, if you think about France, the carte scolaire is also, there is a gimmick also with that respect. But my point was more about specific instruments that we can probably start testing at the, testing the policies, doing a test and experiment in one region, one place and one spot, and then we expand it. That's also, I think, a good practice when you have an idea of a policies to experiment, do an ex post assessment, and then eventually expand it. What has worked? That was my point about this in the context of schooling system and of spatial and so then socio-economic segregation. All policies then could have undesirable effects. And that's one way that we can also learn to redesign. About your question, I was not aware of this, and so I am not an expert. I don't know the history of that decision and initiative. I certainly think that the mobility within the European Union, I mean, that's my claim, is important, including for senior people. I don't see. So I guess that's something that we've been claiming a lot in European debates at the social level, is the importance of the portability of social benefits, right? Including the pension ones. So I guess that should be certainly an objective at the European level. And there are, I mean, it's not like nothing existed, but still the system is certainly far from perfect. So it is part of the European construction, I think, to go towards a little bit more harmonization of the social protection system, and for sure, portability.
Please, shortly, because we are soon rounding up.
Maybe just quickly how we can make that objective a reality, that we have a converging Europe. I mean, we need to have convergence in our economies. And we once had that as a goal. We had growth and convergence as a goal. And look at where we are today. I mean, we don't really care about this anymore. We very officially make macro projections where we see Italy and Germany completely drifting apart and no one cares. It's actually enshrined in the policy that we have to do that. Italy has to run eternal surpluses, cut investments, and we're allowed to do it. So yes, I mean, I fully agree with you on portability, but we need to do something to get there. And at the moment, we're not on the right path.
Do you have a final comment?
Well, I understand the question she has made, because in Spain, a lot of people who was migrant the last decades have the problem that when they have wanted to return to Spain, they have lost the pensions they won when they were working, so they can return.
So that will be the final comment. So thank you very much, Professor Jorge Uxo, Ms. Philippa Sigl-Glöckner, and Ms. Orsetta Causa.